Yep, good. Okay, well, hi there. My name is Andy Wink. I'm the Executive Director for the Bristol Bay Regional Seafood Development Association. And, I know you are probably here to hear what the price might be this summer. I'm not going to try and predict that. Those are company decisions. And, honestly, I've yet to hear a real pervasive argument for making preseason predictions that's not actually counterproductive to our members. But my goal here today is to try to give you objective, unbiased information so fishermen can have a better sense of market conditions as we enter next season. I've got quite a few slides here to run through in about 15 minutes, so I'm going to move fast, but there will be a chance for questions at the end, and I can dive deeper if needed. So first off, what is DBRSTA and what do we do? Our mission is to maximize the value for our members, which is the drift net fleet in Bristol Bay. And we do that through marketing, quality projects, promoting and protecting sustainability of the fishery, and as well as fleet outreach and representation. That logo there is our consumer-facing logo, and that's, probably been on 500,000, maybe even 1 million packages of salmon this year going out. We are directed by a 7 fisherman board. Currently, Michael Jackson is our president, Eric Sable is our vice president, Doug Morgan, treasurer, secretary. We also have Mark Niver and Fritz, who I saw there in the room. Thanks for being there, Fritz. Franz Schoenberg and Peter Andrew. We have a staff of 5, myself, our marketing director, Lilani Dunn, program manager, Francis Birch, who's going to follow me up here. Aubrey McNeil is our newest hire as program specialist, and Becky Machane is our financial administrator. In addition to this, we also have 10 other committee members that are not on the board. We have a variety of committees that kind of act as homework bodies and feed into board decisions. And then we have a 7-person advisory panel as well. So that kind of rounds out the BBRSTA roster of folks. And you can see who all those people are on our website. I think this is a really instructive chart to look at. It's one I keep updated as information becomes available. But basically, we don't buy or sell fish, but our mission is to make the blue bars as high as possible. And that's generally happened over the past decade here. And what we've also seen is that as the resource value, the wholesale value has increased, the fisherman's share of that value has tended to increase over time. So I think that does suggest there's competition filling the space, even though we don't have a plethora necessarily of processing companies. We are seeing fishermen achieve a higher percentage of that resource value over time. Although, of course, you can see here, it varies from year to year, sometimes widely. I'm going to start with kind of good news, bad news, and I'll start with the good news. We have strong demand overall. Consumers around the world more and more are looking for healthy and clean proteins. We have a lot of market awareness and a big customer base. There's a lot of sockeye fans out there, and Bristol Bay is by far the world's largest supply of that. I think it was roughly about 2/3 of global supply last year. The lower 2023 forecast could blunt the effect of potential carryover. And I have a slide on that kind of shows how big 2022 was in a moment. When we look at kind of competing proteins, the supply outlook for farm salmon and beef is fairly constrained next year. It's about flat for farm salmon, and beef is actually projected to beef production is projected to be down by 6%, which I don't think that's happened in a decade or more. So that's good news as far as sockeye fishermen are concerned and sockeye sellers. Lower wholesale prices means more volume sold, which is good. We need volume to be sold, but that process does lag. So we're starting to see prices come down more so in the past 3-4 months than we did, say, right after the season. And then finally, the US dollar has gotten weaker over the past 6 months. So that's a good thing for US exporters. it essentially makes our products cheaper to foreign buyers when our dollar is weaker. And it kind of hit I don't know about an all-time high, but it hit a really high point about 6 months ago, and it's come off that. Okay, I'm doing okay in time. So also good news, I think people definitely understand that the price last year was down, but because the volume was so high, when you look at that total ex vessel value, it was up quite a bit. We don't have the final numbers yet, but probably in the neighborhood of 420 million-ish. So, compared to all the other years, obviously excellent. And really, I mean, I think the wise thing to do here is to kind of view this chart as, 2, 3, or 4 year averages, and kind of, take them in chunks. And so, overall, things are pretty good there. And that's reflected in permit values. I believe this data is through, oh, I'm sorry, it only goes through 21. Thought I'd updated this, but in general, the Bristol Bay drift net salmon fishery has fared quite well compared to other Alaska salmon fisheries. And permit prices encapsulate all those things, right? The current prices, future outlook for supply and demand, and all that stuff. Some other, I think, good news as far as fishermen are concerned. Net processing revenue is basically what I call the gross margin. So the total wholesale value of fish sold less what fishermen get paid. So that amount in the middle that has to pay for everything else that the processors have to pay for, as well as profits. And so that's typically a pretty good barometer. The more margin there is in the previous season, the more working capital gets brought into the next season. And I wanted to take a look at Alaska salmon overall, because with last year's huge harvest, there was a lot of fish processed outside Bristol Bay. So not all those wholesale sales show up as Bristol Bay Sockeye, even though they might have been caught there. And so, the best thing to focus on here is probably the light gray bars, and which is the wholesale sales of salmon products from May through December, less what was paid to fishermen. And, we can see that there's about $230 million increase there running in 2022. And we've still got fish to sell, so that number should go up as data from the January through April comes in. But that's good to see that processors overall in Alaska's salmon fisheries had a decent margin. And I don't have a slide on it, but I'll just point out that Sockeye's component of this was about flat. So a lot of that increase came from pink and chums. On the bad news side of the ledger, it was a big 2022 season that increases the chance for carryover inventory. Wholesale prices for sockeye have come down quite a bit recently. Costs, both on the fishing and the processing side, have increased. Higher interest rates, kind of increases carrying costs, increases financing costs, labor costs more. There's a bunch, supply chain costs for shipping, for storage, especially, are up. Insurance is up quite a bit. And then we're also in a situation where I think consumers are, becoming very sensitive to inflation, obviously, and bracing for a recession. I've seen some data that suggests consumer spending is a little bit softer the last couple months than it was, say maybe September through December. Just to put 2022's Sockeye harvest in perspective, this is all of Alaska's sockeye salmon harvests back to 2010. And last year was a 40% increase over 21, which wasn't that bad of a harvest either. So that's a lot more fish to sell through the system, even with the tailwinds, that we have, which is, like I said, excellent customer base, and people really like healthy, clean proteins. It's still 40% more fish to get sold in 10, 12 months worth of time. I call this a Bristol Bay Sockeye scorecard. It's on our website in a little bit longer format, but I wanted to key in on a few numbers that are kind of concerning to me. So the top numbers that I've highlighted there, you can see Bristol Bay produced an additional roughly 100 million round pounds of sockeye. That's a huge increase, obviously, but that also increased the base ex-vessel value, roughly $100 million. And then when we go down to the bottom there and you look at, okay, so how fast is that selling? How fast is that fish being converted to dollars? We're actually behind the pace a little bit from 2021. So, that's June through December values. And what we'd like to see is those fish caught in 2022 being converted to dollars faster and in greater numbers. But like I said, I think in the wholesale sales data, it probably doesn't all show up as Bristol Bay because we had a lot more fish processed outside of the Bay last year. So I'm not taking that number necessarily as gospel, which is why I had that previous chart that showed it for Alaska salmon overall. Just to give you guys a little context of kind of wholesale pricing, exports are probably about the newest price data that we get that's real reliable. So you can see, the last couple months, this is exports of essentially frozen H&G sockeye. Could be from anywhere, but a lot of it's from Bristol Bay. And that's been down around that 330 to 310 range. Anecdotally, we've heard quotes of $3 or less for number one grade product. So that's kind of where the market is right now or recently. And when you look back at the previous years, obviously we were quite a bit higher. In January, we went to the Global Seafood Marketing Conference, and there was a bunch of great presentations there. I had a chance to connect with lots of buyers and sellers from around the industry and around the world. But I wanted to share a few takeaways that I saw there. And in general, when you look at this, if you look at the bottom numbers, you'll see that poundage, sales of products by pounds is generally down in 2022 versus 2021. Dollars is also down for frozen and refrigerated. And that refrigerated, that sort of chilled product is down the most. Now, a lot of Bristol Bay fish is frozen, but it's also sold in a refresh and chilled format. This is all seafood together, so it's not necessarily just salmon, but in general, this is kind of the seafood trend, which is things got softer in 2022. And so with salmon specifically, you can see that the dollar sales were up about 7%, but the volume was down 3.5%. And I've actually seen some updated figures on this for all salmon categories. And I believe the volume was down about 6% in 2022. I think this only, let's go through December, but it's only for refrigerated. So, definitely some headwinds there in the salmon and the seafood space, although salmon's faring a lot better than other species listed here. But 2021 and 2022 were a little bit of an anomaly. If you go back to 5 years, kind of pre-pandemic, the sales numbers look quite good. Dollar growth is up roughly 50% for fresh and frozen salmon. I kind of think it's interesting that the frozen salmon component shows a much bigger dollar increase than volume. And that to me says that customers are more so choosing probably sockeye, higher end species, and just assigning a higher value to maybe the other products that are there as well. So, if you look back to sort of pre-COVID times, things are still quite good. If you want more data and you want to kind of let your inner nerd out, I would encourage you to go to our market info site. That's bbrsda.com/market info. Otherwise, you can select it off the drop down there in the for the fleet section. Finally, just a couple of slides to finish up here. 2023 outlook, just kind of in bullet format. Oh, there we go. Consumer spending is slowing. The effects of inflation are kind of taking hold. Consumers are generally getting, less for more money. Inventory, that big harvest from 2022 needs to sell to create working capital for 2023. What's left of it is just a cost, right? It costs money to continue to finance it, costs money to store it and ship it, and all the things. That big supply and this economic situation where people are kind of bracing for recession, that's kind of pushing wholesale prices down. And I think the big question is, will they come back up? And if so, to what degree? And I think a lot of that's going to have to do with how much of this pack isn't necessarily just sold to the first wholesale level, but how much is it, of it is consumed and totally cleared out of the market. Costs and complexities remain high. I don't know why I did that, but sorry. I think a couple other things is that we should certainly see more excess processing capacity in 2023 if the harvest comes in as forecast. And that's good because that, kind of promotes competition for fish when processors have excess capacity. And in the long term, I'm quite bullish. We've had this odd situation with this massive harvest, but supply and lower prices do create future demand. And so I think we'll benefit from that in the longer term, as well as the other kind of consumer tailwinds I talked about. But in general, my advice would be talk to your processors about what this season looks like. I think they're in the best position to give advice on what to expect as much as they can or will. But that would be my advice. So if you want to get in touch with the board or BBRSTA, you can email board@bbrsda.com or info@bbrsda.com. I'd be happy to get back to you and send anything along to the board. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frances, and then I'll take Tab. I suppose you want me to take questions after she's done?
Yeah, that's fine.